Tonight, before we begin our stories, let us take a quiet moment together, wherever you are, in your room, resting beneath warm blankets, or simply closing your eyes after a long day. Allow your body to soften and let your thoughts begin to slow. Take a slow breath in and gently release it. Another slow breath, and let the tension of the day drift away. Tonight we are going to listen to peaceful stories from the Bible, stories that remind us that God still speaks to those who listen. Sometimes His message comes in great moments of power, but often it comes quietly, in stillness, in calm, in moments just like this. So before we begin, let us pray. Dear God, tonight we come before you with quiet hearts. You know the thoughts that have followed us through the day, the worries we carry, and the questions we sometimes hold in silence. As we listen to these peaceful stories tonight, help our minds slow down. Help our hearts feel your presence. Let your word bring comfort to those who feel anxious, peace to those who feel restless, and hope to those who feel uncertain. Remind us tonight that you are near, watching over us, guiding us, and speaking gently to those who listen. As these stories unfold, let your voice bring calm to every heart listening tonight. And as sleep slowly arrives, let us rest knowing that we are never alone. Amen. Now, let us begin our first story. Samuel hears God's voice long ago in the quiet hills of Israel. There lived a young boy named Samuel. Samuel lived in the temple of the Lord, a peaceful place where lamps burned softly through the night, and the air carried a sense of calm and reverence. The temple was cared for by an older priest named Eli, who guided Samuel and taught him the ways of God. During the day, Samuel helped with simple tasks. He opened doors, kept the lamps burning, and listened carefully as Eli shared the wisdom of the scriptures. Samuel was still young, but his heart was open. He wanted to learn, and he wanted to serve God faithfully. And so each night, when the temple grew quiet, Samuel would lie down and rest. The lamps flickered gently in the darkness, and outside, the night sky stretched across the land like a peaceful blanket of stars. One night, as Samuel slept in the temple, something unexpected happened. In the stillness of the night, a voice called his name. Samuel. Samuel stirred from sleep. He sat up quickly, looking around the quiet room. He thought the voice must have been Eli calling him. So Samuel rose from his bed and walked through the dimly lit temple. "Eli, you called me?" he asked. But Eli looked up with confusion. "I did not call you," Eli said gently. "Go back and lie down." So Samuel returned to his place and lay down once more. The temple was quiet again. The lamps flickered softly, and outside, the stars continued their silent watch. Then once again, the voice came. "Samuel." Samuel sat up again. Surely Eli must need something. Once again he hurried to Eli. "You called me," Samuel said. But Eli shook his head. "I did not call you, my son. Go and lie down again." Samuel returned to bed, still unsure of what he had heard. The temple grew quiet once more. The stillness of the night wrapped around the ancient walls, and the gentle glow of the lamps filled the room. Then, for a third time, the voice came. "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel rose once again and hurried to Eli, But this time, Eli paused, slowly. The older priest began to understand. It was not he who had called the boy. It was the Lord. So Eli spoke gently to Samuel. "Go and lie down again," he said. "And if you hear the voice call you again, say this, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Samuel returned quietly to his place, his heart curious, yet calm. He lay down once more. The temple was silent, the lamps flickered softly, and then the voice came again. "Samuel, Samuel." This time, Samuel did not run. He stayed where he was and remembered Eli's words. Softly, with a humble heart, Samuel replied, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And in that quiet moment, Samuel began to hear the voice of God, not in thunder, not in noise, but in the quiet stillness of the night. And from that moment forward, Samuel grew into a wise and faithful servant of the Lord, because he had learned something simple, yet powerful. God often speaks to those who are willing to listen. And sometimes, the quietest moments are the moments when his voice can be heard the clearest. Tonight, as you rest, remember this gentle truth. God still speaks, and even in the quiet stillness of the night, He is near. Sometimes, we expect God's voice to come in loud and powerful ways, in moments of great signs or sudden miracles, but the story of Samuel reminds us of something gentle and deeply comforting. God often speaks in quiet moments. When the world slows down, when the noise of the day fades, and when our hearts finally grow still, Samuel heard God's voice in the middle of the night, in the calm silence of the temple. Not because he was searching for something dramatic, but because his heart was open. And tonight, in this quiet moment before sleep, your heart can be open too. You do not need to search for answers tonight. You do not need to solve every problem or understand every question. Instead, you can simply rest. Just as Samuel lay quietly in the temple, you can lie quietly where you are, breathing slowly, allowing your thoughts to soften, allowing your mind to grow calm. And as the quiet of the night settles around you, remember this simple truth. God is not far away. Even in the silence, He is near. Even in the stillness, He is present. And sometimes, when our minds finally become quiet, that is when we are most able to hear Him. Now, let us gently continue to our next story. Elijah and the still small voice. Our next story takes us into the quiet mountains, to a moment when a weary man named Elijah needed to hear God's voice. Elijah was a prophet, a messenger chosen by God to guide the people of Israel. But the life of a prophet was not always easy. Many times Elijah faced conflict and danger. He had spoken boldly about truth and stood firm in his faith even when others turned away from God. And after a great moment of courage, after standing before kings and crowds, Elijah found himself exhausted. His body was tired, his heart was heavy, and his mind was filled with uncertainty. Sometimes even the strongest people grow weary. Sometimes even those with great faith need rest. And so Elijah left the busy places of the city and traveled far into the wilderness. The land grew quieter as he walked. The villages disappeared behind him. The noise of people faded into silence. Soon, Elijah found himself surrounded only by the vast beauty of nature. Rolling hills stretched into the distance. Ancient mountains stood tall beneath the wide sky. The The wind moved gently across the land. As the sun slowly moved across the sky, Elijah continued walking, hour after hour, step after step, until finally, he reached a mountain known as Horeb. This was a place of deep history. Long before Elijah's time, this mountain had been a place where people had encountered God. And as Elijah approached the mountain, the air felt calm and still. The evening light was soft. The sky above began to shift into gentle shades of gold and purple. Birds circled quietly in the distance, and the wind whispered softly through the rocks and trees. Elijah found a small cave along the side of the mountain, a quiet shelter where he could rest. Inside the cave, the air was cool and peaceful. The stone walls carried the quiet of the mountain within them. It was a place where the world seemed to slow down. Elijah sat there, thinking about everything that had happened, all the challenges he had faced, all the uncertainty that lay ahead. And in that quiet moment, God spoke to Elijah, not loudly, not with thunder, but with a simple question. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah answered honestly. He spoke about his worries, about the struggles he had faced, about how alone he felt. Even great prophets sometimes feel overwhelmed. Even faithful hearts sometimes grow tired. But God gently guided Elijah to step outside the cave. "Go out and stand on the mountain," the Lord said, "for I am about to pass by." So Elijah walked slowly to the entrance of the cave. The air outside had grown cooler as the evening settled across the land. He stood there quietly, looking out across the mountains, waiting. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept across the mountain. The gusts roared through the valley, rocks shifted, dust and leaves swirled through the air. It was a wind so strong it felt like the mountain itself might shake. But the Lord was not in the wind. Then, the ground began to tremble. An earthquake moved through the mountain. The earth beneath Elijah's feet shook and rumbled. The great stones of the mountain groaned as the earth shifted. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire appeared. Flames flickered and danced along the rocks. The fire burned brightly in the growing darkness, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then, after the wind, after the earthquake, after the fire, everything became quiet. The mountain grew still. The wind faded. The flames disappeared. The earth stopped trembling. And in the deep quiet that followed, there came a gentle whisper, a sound so soft, it was almost like the quiet breath of the wind through the trees. A still, small voice. When Elijah heard the whisper, he knew God was there. Not in the great noise of power, not in the dramatic moments of force, but in the quiet. Elijah covered his face with his cloak, standing in humble reverence, because he understood something important in that moment. God often speaks in ways that are gentle, ways that require us to slow down, to become still, to listen carefully. And there, on that quiet mountain, God spoke to Elijah once more. He reminded Elijah that he was not alone, that there were still many people who remained faithful, that Elijah's work was not finished, and that God would continue guiding him. Elijah had come to the mountain feeling overwhelmed, but he left with renewed strength, because he had heard the voice of God in the quiet whisper. The story of Elijah reminds us of something deeply comforting. Sometimes we expect God to speak through great events, through powerful signs, through moments that shake the world. But often, God speaks differently, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the quiet whisper. And tonight, as the world around you grows calm, this quiet moment may be closer to that whisper than you realize. When the noise of the day fades, when the worries begin to slow, when your breathing grows gentle and steady, that is when the heart becomes still. And when the heart becomes still, it becomes easier to hear the quiet guidance of God. You do not need to search for dramatic signs tonight. You do not need to force answers to appear. Instead, you can simply rest. Let the quiet of this moment surround you. Let the calm of the night settle over your thoughts. And remember the lesson Elijah learned on the mountain. God is not always found in the loudest moments of life. Sometimes, His voice comes gently, like a quiet whisper. Now, as your mind continues to slow, let us move gently into our next story. Jesus calms the storm. As evening settled across the land of Galilee, the warm colors of the day slowly faded from the sky. The sun drifted lower toward the distant hills, casting golden reflections across the quiet waters of the Sea of Galilee. Fishing boats rested along the shoreline. The air carried the gentle scent of water and wind, and the voices of people who had gathered during the day slowly faded into the calm of the evening. It had been a long day for Jesus and His disciples. Throughout the day, crowds had gathered along the shore to hear Jesus speak. Men, women, and children had come from nearby villages, walking dusty paths and narrow roads just for the chance to hear His words. Jesus had taught them many things. He had shared parables about faith, about seeds growing quietly in fields, about lamps shining in the darkness, and about the kingdom of God. The crowds had listened with great attention. Some sat on the grassy hills that overlooked the sea. Others stood close to the water's edge, and still more listened from small boats drifting gently nearby. As the day slowly came to an end, the crowd began to thin. Families gathered their belongings. Children who had grown tired leaned against their parents. The sound of footsteps faded along the shoreline, and the peaceful quiet of evening returned. Jesus looked out across the water. The sea stretched wide before Him, its surface calm and smooth beneath the soft glow of the setting sun. Turning to His disciples, Jesus spoke gently, "Let us go over to the other side." The disciples were familiar with the sea. Many of them had once been fishermen. They knew the rhythms of the water, the feel of the wind, and the quiet sounds of the evening waves. So they prepared the boat. Soon Jesus stepped aboard, and the disciples followed. The ropes were loosened. The boat drifted slowly away from the shore. Behind them, the last voices of the crowd faded into the distance. The Sea of Galilee stretched quietly beneath the darkening sky. Small ripples moved across the water as the boat glided forward. Above them, the first stars began to appear. The air was calm. The night felt peaceful. Inside the boat, Jesus lay down on a cushion near the stern. He had spent the entire day teaching and guiding others. Now, as the gentle rocking of the boat moved with the water, Jesus rested. Soon, He fell asleep. The disciples continued guiding the boat across the sea. The moon rose slowly above the horizon. Its pale light shimmered across the surface of the water. Everything seemed calm. But the Sea of Galilee was known for sudden storms, because it rested deep within the surrounding hills. Cold winds could rush down the mountains without warning. And that night, as the boat moved farther from shore, the wind began to change. At first it was only a gentle gust, a quiet movement of air across the water, but soon the wind grew stronger. The surface of the sea began to ripple more quickly. The boat rocked slightly from side to side. The disciples looked toward the sky. Dark clouds began forming in the distance. The peaceful night was changing. Within moments, the wind surged across the water with great force. Waves began to rise. The calm sea transformed into a restless storm. The small boat was tossed by the growing waves. Water splashed over the sides. The wind howled across the surface of the sea. The sky above darkened as clouds covered the moon. The disciples worked quickly. Some grabbed ropes. Others struggled to steer the boat. Their hands gripped the wooden sides as the waves crashed against them. Many of the disciples had spent their lives on this water. They knew the power of storms, and they knew how dangerous the sea could become. But in the middle of the storm, something remarkable was happening. Jesus was still asleep. Even as the wind roared around the boat, even as waves crashed against the wood, Jesus remained peacefully resting. The disciples could hardly believe it. The storm was growing stronger with every moment. Water filled the boat. The waves lifted them high and dropped them sharply back down. Fear began to rise among the disciples. They struggled to keep the boat from filling with water. The storm seemed overwhelming. Finally, they hurried to where Jesus lay sleeping. "Teacher," they cried, "do you not care that we are perishing?" Their voices were filled with urgency. The storm raged around them. The wind roared. The waves continued to crash. Jesus opened his eyes. Slowly, he stood. The wind whipped around him. The boat rocked beneath his feet. The dark sky swirled with storm clouds, but Jesus remained calm. Looking out across the raging sea, he spoke, "Peace, be still." And immediately, the storm stopped. The wind faded. The waves settled. The clouds slowly parted. The sea returned to calm. Within moments, the water that had been raging with power became smooth and quiet again. The moon reappeared between the clouds. Its light shimmered softly across the peaceful sea. The boat rocked gently, just as it had earlier that evening. The disciples stood in silence. Moments ago, they had been surrounded by chaos. Now, everything was still. Jesus turned to them. "Why are you afraid?" he asked gently. "Have you still no faith?" The disciples looked at one another in awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Even the wind and the waves had obeyed his voice, and in the quiet that followed, they began to understand something deeper about the one who stood before them. The sea had listened to him. The storm had obeyed him. Even the forces of nature had recognized his authority. And now, in the calm after the storm, the Sea of Galilee rested peacefully beneath the moonlight. The story of the storm on the Sea of Galilee reminds us of something important about life. Storms will come, moments of fear, moments of uncertainty, moments when everything feels overwhelming. Just like the disciples in the boat, we sometimes feel surrounded by waves we cannot control. But the story also reminds us of something deeply comforting. Even in the middle of the storm, Jesus was present. While the wind roared, he was still there. While the waves crashed, he remained close. And when the time was right, with just a few words, he brought calm to the chaos. Tonight, if your mind feels like that storm, if your thoughts have been racing, if worries have been moving through your heart like restless waves, remember this moment on the sea. Jesus is still the one who calms storms. And sometimes, the peace we are searching for begins simply by resting in his presence. Now, as the quiet of the night continues to surround you, let your thoughts grow calmer, like the sea beneath the moonlight. and let us gently move into our next story. The Shepherd and the Lost Sheep. Long ago, in the rolling hills of Judea, shepherds spent their days guiding flocks of sheep across the countryside. The land was wide and open. Grassy hills stretched across the horizon. Wildflowers grew among the rocks, and narrow paths wound through the quiet valleys. Shepherds lived simple lives. Each morning, as the sun rose gently over the hills, they would gather their flocks and lead them toward fresh pasture. The sheep followed closely behind. They trusted the voice of the shepherd. They recognized his call. Throughout the day, the shepherd watched carefully over every sheep. He guided them toward water. He kept them away from dangerous cliffs and deep ravines. And he remained alert for wild animals that might threaten the flock. The shepherd knew his sheep. He noticed when one wandered too far. He could hear when one cried out. Every sheep mattered. One day, as Jesus was teaching a group of people, he shared a story about a shepherd. The people gathered around him were listening closely. Some were curious, some were searching for hope, and others simply wanted to understand the deeper meaning of his words. Jesus often used simple stories drawn from everyday life, so that people could understand the heart of God. And so he said to them, "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep." The people listening could easily picture the scene: a shepherd standing among a large flock, sheep scattered across the hills, grazing quietly in the grass. The soft sound of bells tied around their necks, the gentle breeze moving through the valley. Then Jesus continued, "And suppose one of those sheep becomes lost." This was something that could happen easily. Sheep sometimes wandered. A small patch of grass might lead them a little farther away. A curious step might take them beyond the edge of the flock, and before long, they could find themselves alone. The hills were vast, the paths were confusing, and a sheep separated from the flock could quickly become frightened. So Jesus asked a simple question: what will the shepherd do? Will he ignore the missing sheep? Will he say to himself, "I still have 99 others, so one lost sheep does not matter"? No. Jesus explained that a shepherd would do something very different. The shepherd would leave the 99 sheep safely together in the open field, and he would go searching for the one that was lost. Imagine the quiet hills at that moment, the flock resting together beneath the evening sky, the shepherd standing at the edge of the field, looking across the wide landscape. He notices that one sheep is missing. Without hesitation, the shepherd begins to search. He walks slowly across the hills. His eyes scan the valleys and rocky paths. The sun begins to lower in the sky as the hours pass. The wind moves softly through the grass. Birds circle high above, and the shepherd continues searching. Sometimes he calls out, listening carefully, hoping to hear the faint cry of the lost sheep. The light of the day begins to fade. The sky turns shades of orange and purple. Long shadows stretch across the land. But the shepherd does not stop, because every sheep matters. Finally, in the quiet distance, the shepherd hears something. A faint sound, a frightened cry. The lost sheep. The shepherd moves toward the sound. Across the rocks, down a small slope, until he finds the sheep standing alone. The animal is tired, confused, but safe. And when the shepherd finds the sheep, he does not scold it. Instead, he gently lifts the sheep onto his shoulders. With careful steps, he carries it back across the hills. The night sky begins to appear above them. Stars slowly fill the darkness. The quiet of evening settles across the land. Soon the shepherd returns to the place where the flock is resting. The other sheep remain safe, and the one who was lost has been found. Jesus said that when the shepherd returns home, he calls his friends and neighbors together, and he says, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep." Then Jesus shared the deeper meaning of the story. God cares deeply for every person. Just as the shepherd searched for the one lost sheep, God seeks those who feel lost, those who feel forgotten, those who feel alone. Every life matters, every heart is known, and no one is ever too far away to be found. The story of the lost sheep carries a message of great comfort. Sometimes, life can make us feel like that wandering sheep. We may feel uncertain, we may feel far from where we want to be, or we may simply feel alone. But this story reminds us of something important. God does not forget us. Just as the shepherd searched through the hills for one missing sheep, God continues to seek those who need guidance. He does not abandon the lost. He does not ignore the wandering. Instead, he patiently searches, and when he finds us, he lifts us with care. Tonight, as you rest, remember that you are never beyond the reach of God's love. You are known, you are seen, and you are cared for, like a sheep in the care of a gentle shepherd. Now, as the quiet of the night continues, let us gently move into our next story. Daniel in the lion's den. Many years after the time of Elijah, there lived a man named Daniel. Daniel was known throughout the land for his wisdom, his honesty, and his unwavering faith in God. He lived during a time when the kingdom of Babylon had fallen, and the Persian Empire had risen to power. The new ruler of the land was a king named Darius. King Darius governed a vast kingdom that stretched across many lands and cities. To help manage such a great empire, he appointed many officials and leaders. Among them, Daniel quickly stood out. Daniel was trustworthy. He was thoughtful in his decisions, and he served the king faithfully. Because of these qualities, King Darius began to favor Daniel above the other leaders. Soon, the king considered placing Daniel in charge over much of the kingdom, but not everyone was pleased with this. Some of the other officials grew jealous. They searched for a reason to accuse Daniel. They watched his work carefully, hoping to find a mistake. But Daniel was honest. He carried out his duties with integrity. No wrongdoing could be found. Finally, they realized something. The only way they could trap Daniel was through his faith. Daniel prayed to God every day. 3 times a day, he would open the window of his home and pray. The jealous officials gathered together and formed a plan. They went before King Darius and said, "Your Majesty, let a royal decree be established. For 30 days, no one may pray to any god or man except you, O king. Anyone who disobeys shall be thrown into the lion's den." King Darius, not realizing their true motive, agreed to the decree. The law was written and sealed, and according to the law of the Medes and Persians, it could not be changed. When Daniel learned of the new decree, he returned home quietly. He knew the law. He understood the danger. But Daniel had spent his life trusting God, and he would not stop now. So Daniel went to the room where he always prayed. He opened the window toward Jerusalem, as he had done many times before. And there, in the quiet of his home, he knelt down and prayed. He gave thanks to God. He placed his trust in him, and he continued his faithful prayers, just as he had always done. The jealous officials were watching. They hurried to the king and said, "Did you not sign a decree that anyone who prays to any god except you must be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "Yes, the law stands." Then they said, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, still prays to his God 3 times a day." When the king heard this, his heart sank. He respected Daniel. He knew Daniel was a good man. All day long, King Darius searched for a way to rescue him, but the law could not be changed. And as evening came, Daniel was brought before the king. With great reluctance, King Darius gave the command. Daniel would be placed into the lion's den. The den was a deep stone pit carved into the earth. Inside, lions were kept as a form of punishment for criminals. The animals were powerful and feared throughout the kingdom. As Daniel was brought to the opening of the den, King Darius spoke to him with hope in his voice. "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Then Daniel was lowered into the den. A large stone was rolled across the opening. The king sealed it with his signet ring, so that no one could change what had been done. That night, King Darius could not sleep. He refused music. He refused food. His thoughts remained with Daniel, but inside the lion's den, something remarkable was happening. The night grew quiet. Moonlight stretched faintly across the desert sky. Inside the den, the lions lay still. Daniel remained calm. The scriptures tell us that God sent an angel who shut the mouths of the lions. And so the powerful animals that could have harmed Daniel remained peaceful. Daniel prayed, and he rested in the quiet darkness of the den. The long night slowly passed. When the first light of dawn appeared, King Darius hurried to the den. His heart was heavy with worry. As he approached the stone, he called out with an anxious voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" From inside the den, Daniel answered calmly, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not harmed me." Relief filled the king's heart. Immediately, he ordered Daniel to be lifted out of the den. When Daniel emerged, not a single wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The story of Daniel reminds us of something deeply peaceful. Even in moments of danger, Daniel remained calm. Even in the darkness of the lion's den, he trusted that God was with him. Sometimes life can feel like that dark place. Moments when we feel uncertain. Moments when fear tries to surround us. But Daniel's story reminds us, God remains present, even in the darkest nights. And just as Daniel rested safely among the lions, we too can rest, trusting that God watches over us tonight as sleep slowly comes. Remember this gentle truth. You are never alone. God is with you, even in the quiet of the night. Jesus walks on the water. The day had been long, but filled with wonder. Crowds had gathered across the hills near the Sea of Galilee. Men, women, and children who had come to hear Jesus speak. They had followed him from nearby towns and villages, walking dusty roads beneath the warm sun, hoping to listen to his teaching and witness the works he performed. And on that day, they had seen something extraordinary. A great multitude had gathered in a quiet place near the water, and Jesus had fed them with only a small offering of food, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Yet somehow, miraculously, everyone had eaten. Thousands of people sat upon the grass, sharing the meal, and when it was finished, there was more left over than what had begun. The people were amazed. They whispered among themselves, wondering about the power they had witnessed. As evening approached, Jesus gently sent the crowds away. Families gathered their belongings. Children who had spent the long day playing near the water grew tired. The quiet hills slowly emptied as people returned to their homes. The sky began to soften with the colors of evening. Jesus then turned to his disciples. "Get into the boat," he told them, "and go ahead of me to the other side of the lake." The disciples obeyed. They stepped into their boat and pushed away from the shore. The wooden vessel drifted slowly into the open water. Behind them, the last sounds of the departing crowd faded into silence. Meanwhile, Jesus walked alone into the hills. He had often done this. After long days of teaching and guiding others, he would seek a quiet place to pray. The hillside was peaceful. The wind moved gently through the grass, and the evening sky deepened into shades of blue. There, beneath the quiet of the night, Jesus prayed. Out on the water, the disciples continued their journey. The Sea of Galilee stretched wide before them. The moon rose slowly above the distant hills, casting pale silver light across the surface of the water. The boat moved steadily through the night. The disciples worked together to guide the vessel across the lake. Some adjusted the sails. Others steered the rudder. The rhythmic sound of water against the boat created a steady pattern, rocking them gently with each passing wave. For a time, the journey was peaceful, but during the night, the wind began to rise. At first it was only a whisper across the water, but gradually the breeze grew stronger. Small waves began to form. The boat rocked more heavily. The disciples worked harder to keep their course. The hours passed slowly. The moon continued climbing through the sky, and the wind pressed steadily against the boat. They were far from the shore now. The darkness of the water surrounded them. Then, in the early hours before dawn, something appeared in the distance. At first it was only a faint shape upon the water, a figure moving across the waves. The disciples strained their eyes. The wind blew across the lake. The water shifted beneath the moonlight, and the figure continued moving closer. Fear rose among them. "It is a ghost," some whispered. Their voices trembled in the darkness, because what they were seeing seemed impossible. The figure was walking upon the water. But then, a familiar voice carried across the waves. "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." The disciples listened carefully. The voice was unmistakable. It was Jesus, standing upon the water, walking calmly across the waves. Jesus approached the boat. The wind continued to move across the lake. The waves lifted and fell beneath his feet, yet he walked steadily, as if the water itself had become firm beneath him. The disciples watched in amazement. Then Peter spoke. Peter had always been bold, often the first to step forward, the first to act. And now, seeing Jesus upon the water, he felt a sudden spark of faith. "Lord," Peter said, "if it is truly you, tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus looked at him and answered simply, "Come." Peter stepped towards the edge of the boat. The wind blew across the water. The waves rose and fell beneath the moonlight. But Peter climbed over the side and placed his foot upon the sea. For a moment, something extraordinary happened. Peter walked upon the water toward Jesus. Step by step, he moved across the waves. But then, Peter noticed the wind. He felt the force of the storm around him. The waves moved beneath his feet. Fear began to rise within his heart. And as fear replaced faith, Peter began to sink. "Lord, save me," he cried. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand. He caught Peter and lifted him up. "You of little faith," Jesus said gently, "why did you doubt?" Together, they returned to the boat. As soon as they climbed aboard, the wind died down. The sea grew calm. The moonlight once again shimmered across the water. The waves softened into quiet ripples. The disciples looked at Jesus with awe. They had seen something they would never forget. And in that quiet moment, they spoke words that came from deep within their hearts. "Truly, you are the Son of God." The boat continued its journey across the peaceful sea as the first light of dawn began to rise over the distant hills. When fear meets faith. The story of Jesus walking on the water reminds us of something deeply comforting. Life often brings moments when we feel like Peter standing on the waves. Moments when the winds of worry begin to rise. Moments when the waves of uncertainty seem too strong. But this story reminds us of something important. Even in the storm, Jesus was already there, walking across the water, moving calmly through the wind, coming toward his disciples. And when Peter cried out for help, Jesus reached out his hand immediately. Tonight, if your thoughts feel like those restless waves, remember this moment on the sea. You do not face the storm alone, just as Jesus stood beside Peter on the water. He stands beside us in our moments of fear, and when we call for help, his hand is already reaching out. Now, as the night continues to grow quiet around you, let your thoughts grow calm like the sea after the wind has passed. And let us gently move into our final story. The Good Shepherd. Long ago, in the quiet countryside of Israel, shepherds guided their flocks across wide and peaceful hills. The land stretched gently toward the horizon. Rolling fields of grass moved softly with the wind. Olive trees dotted the landscape, and narrow streams flowed quietly through the valleys. In those days, sheep depended completely on their shepherd. They trusted his voice. They followed his guidance. And wherever the shepherd led, the flock would go. Each morning, as the sun rose over the hills, the shepherd would open the gate of the sheepfold. The sheepfold was a simple stone enclosure, built to protect the sheep during the night. Inside the walls, the flock rested safely, and often the shepherd himself would lie near the entrance, guarding the doorway. When morning came, the shepherd would call to the sheep. His voice was familiar. The sheep recognized it immediately. They would lift their heads, listening carefully, and one by one, they would begin to follow him. He would lead them out into the open hills. There, they would find fresh grass and clean water. The shepherd walked ahead of them, watching the path carefully. He knew where the land was safe. He knew where hidden dangers might be. If a wild animal approached, the shepherd would defend the flock. If a sheep wandered too far, he would guide it back. If one became tired, he would carry it until it could walk again. A good shepherd did not simply watch the flock from a distance. He lived among them. He knew them, and he cared for everyone. One day, as Jesus spoke to the people gathered around him, he used this familiar image to describe something deeper. Many of the people listening had seen shepherds in the fields. Some had even cared for sheep themselves. So Jesus said to them, "The one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep." The people listened quietly. The wind moved softly through the nearby hills, and Jesus continued. The sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. In those quiet fields, a shepherd might guide dozens, sometimes even hundreds of sheep, but he still knew each one. He noticed the small differences between them. He recognized their movements, and he cared for each animal individually. Jesus explained that when the shepherd leads the flock, the sheep follow him, not because they are forced, but because they trust his voice. A stranger might call to them, but the sheep would not follow. They would move away from unfamiliar voices, because they knew the voice of their shepherd. Then Jesus spoke words that carried a deeper meaning. I am the good shepherd. The people listened carefully, because this was more than a simple story about sheep. It was a message about care, about protection, and about love. Jesus explained that the good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. A hired worker might run away when danger appears, but the true shepherd remains. He protects the flock, even when it is difficult, because the sheep belong to him, and he cares for them deeply. Jesus said that he knows his sheep, and his sheep know him. Just as a shepherd recognizes the quiet footsteps of his flock across the grass, Jesus knows the hearts of those who follow him. He sees when they are joyful, he notices when they are weary, and he understands when they feel lost. Just as a shepherd guides sheep through valleys and hills, Jesus guides people through the journey of life, through moments of peace, through seasons of difficulty, and through times when the path ahead feels uncertain. And just as a shepherd leads his flock toward safe pastures, Jesus leads those who trust him toward life. Imagine a peaceful hillside at sunset, the sky glowing softly with the last light of day, the flock resting quietly in the grass, the shepherd standing nearby, watching carefully. The air is calm, the wind moves gently across the land, the sheep settle into the quiet of evening, and the shepherd remains close, guarding the flock through the night. That is the image Jesus gave to the people that day, a picture of calm guidance, of watchful care, of a shepherd who never abandons his flock. And in that peaceful moment, those who listened began to understand the message. The good shepherd does not forget his sheep. He walks beside them, he protects them, and he guides them, even through the quiet hours of the night. The image of the Good Shepherd brings a deep sense of peace. Just as sheep rest safely under the watchful care of their shepherd, we too can rest knowing that God watches over us. Life sometimes feels like a long journey across unknown hills. There are moments when we feel uncertain about the path ahead, moments when we feel tired or unsure of where to go next. But the Good Shepherd walks before us. He sees the path clearly. He understands the journey, and he guides those who trust in him. Tonight, as you prepare to rest, you can imagine yourself like one of the sheep resting in a quiet field. The day is finished. The hills grow still. The stars begin to appear in the sky. And nearby, the shepherd watches over the flock. You are safe. You are known. You are cared for. And as sleep gently arrives, you can rest peacefully, knowing that the Good Shepherd is near. Now, as our stories come to a close tonight, allow yourself to rest a little deeper. Let your body relax where you are. Let the quiet of this moment settle around you. Take a slow breath in and gently release it. Another slow breath. And let your shoulders soften. The day is finished now. The work, the conversations, the worries, They can all rest for the night. And in this quiet moment, let us pray together. Dear God, thank you for this peaceful moment. Thank you for the quiet of the night that allows our hearts to slow down and our minds to rest. You know every person listening right now. You know the thoughts that have been moving through their minds today, the worries they carry, the questions they hold, and the things that may feel heavy on their hearts. Tonight we place all of those things in your hands. If someone listening feels anxious tonight, bring calm to their mind. If someone feels overwhelmed by the challenges of life, remind them that they are not walking through those moments alone. If someone feels tired, deeply tired in their heart and spirit, restore their strength as they rest. Just as you calm the storm on the Sea of Galilee, bring calm to every restless thought tonight. Just as you walked across the water to reach your disciples, draw close to those who feel uncertain or afraid. And just as the Good Shepherd watches over his flock, watch gently over every person listening now. Let your peace fill this room. Let your comfort surround them. And let your presence bring quiet to every anxious thought. Tonight we release the worries of tomorrow. Tomorrow will come when the sun rises. But tonight, we rest. Tonight, we trust. Tonight, we remember that your care never fades, even in the darkest hours of the night. Lord, as sleep begins to arrive, slow every racing thought. Let the mind grow quiet, like calm waters beneath the moonlight. Let the body relax. Let the breathing become steady and peaceful. Just as sheep rest safely under the watchful care of the shepherd, allow every listener to rest safely in your presence tonight. For those who feel lonely, remind them that they are never truly alone. For those who feel uncertain about the future, remind them that you walk before them, guiding every step. For those who feel burdened by the past, remind them that your mercy is new every morning. And for those who simply need rest, grant them deep and peaceful sleep tonight. Let the quiet of this moment grow deeper. Let the mind drift gently away from the worries of the day. Let the heart feel calm, safe, and at peace. As the night continues and sleep slowly arrives, may every person listening feel your gentle presence near them, watching over them, protecting them, guiding them. And when morning comes, may they wake refreshed, renewed, and filled with quiet hope. But for now, rest. The night is peaceful, the world is quiet, and you are safe in the care of God. Amen. Now, let your thoughts grow softer. Let your breathing become slow and steady, and allow yourself to drift gently into peaceful sleep. Good night.